Welcome back to Real-ationship Goals, a podcast all about exploring the realities and complexities of healthy relationships. Real-ationship Goals is a project of the Prevention and Education team at the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence or harassment and is seeking support services or needs more information, links to resources and our hotline number can be found in the description. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of their organizations or affiliates. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Real-ationship Goals. We are so glad that you're here. I'm Kyla and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Ariana and I use she, her pronouns. I'm Monica, I use they, she pronouns.
I'm Elsie and I use she, her pronouns.
So today is another one of our special topics episodes, and we wanted to take a little time to highlight the importance of men and boys and their role in the movement to end sexual violence and just in engaging in all of the kind of work that we do. So we wanted to take a little bit of time to celebrate those organizations and those individuals that are contributing important things to the movement. So we'll go ahead and dive on in. I have our first shareable, I would say. So I found an organization online called White Ribbon, and it is based out of Canada, which is fun. So their website that you can go to is just whiteribbon.ca. That was my first clue that it was in Canada. And they're really interesting. So kind of like I don't want to call it their motto, but kind of their mission is they're committed to building a world free of all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination. They focus a lot on male allyship and the important role that men and boys play in ending sexual violence and gender discrimination. This particular organization is based out of Canada, but I thought it was so important to just kind of acknowledge the work that they're doing. And I thought that they had a few particularly interesting resources that are available on the website as well. One of which is just a consent quiz that I thought was cool. So it's just like, hey, like, what is consent? What are different situations that you need it? So I just thought that was really cool. So that's just a fun little tool resource that you're able to use. And then something that I thought was really, really unique and probably the most interesting about their website is they have a whole tab under their like what we do that just says accountability that I thought was really interesting. So they do, I think, a variety of different things. So they have like free consultations. I don't know, I didn't fully investigate to see if like anyone from like even the US could reach out for a free consultation. It would be worth exploring, I feel like. But they do consultations with like individuals, workplaces, institutions, things like that. And I think they just kind of, the goal is to come alongside as like a partner. So I could see that for like workplaces and institutions reviewing policies and procedures, seeing like what are ways that you may be intentionally or unintentionally engaging in like perpetuating some of the like gender norms and stereotypes, things like that, or like patriarchal kind of supports, things like that. And then particularly for individuals, they actually have a story from someone named Jordan Boswell, who, whenever he was like 18, made hurtful and misogynistic comments on social media about a survivor of sex trafficking. And he partnered with community organizers and with White Ribbon to work towards like holding himself accountable, to learn to educate himself, and to even like make a statement about what he had done, kind of like how he had grown and how he wanted to continue growing. And most importantly, I think, why the things that he said mattered, which I thought was really, really cool. That's not something that we see a lot. And I feel like accountability itself is such, like, each of us, of course, holding ourselves accountable, but also men holding each other accountable is something that I think doesn't get a lot of focus or a lot of attention. So I just thought that was really interesting. And then in that same like section, they also have, I believe it's like an article or just like a web page on 10 steps that men can take towards accountability. So I just thought that was really, really interesting.
Question.
Potential answer.
Mr. Boswell?
Yeah.
he made those comments when he was 17, or he reached out when he was
No,
17?
he made, I don't remember exactly what the platform was. I know it was like social media comments. He made the comments when he was 18.
Okay.
And then he grew up a little bit more. And I know at one point he was like running for office. So like that was a part of it too.
That makes sense.
I know, right? But that was a part of it too, where he was like, the timing of this makes sense. He said, but also like I just needed to learn to do better. So it was really interesting. I actually read the whole like little article that he had written. I would heavily recommend it. It was really interesting. Just on self-reflection and self-awareness and trying to dedicate to personal growth. But yeah, he made the comments when he was 18, grew up and was like, I need to learn how to do better, and I also need to learn because I think that's a hard thing too sometimes. Because like I don't know about y'all, I said stupid stuff that I don't quite agree with anymore, like on social media. It's like, what is a good way to like how? What is the best way to say, hey, that was wrong? So I think that's really interesting. Whiteribbon.ca.
And I'm about to look up their stuff afterward.
It's interesting.
Because I do want to see the quiz.
Yeah.
They also have White Ribbon Day. It's November 25th, so be for social media because I'm going to post about it.
Oh, nice.
Celebrated in the US too? Or is it? Okay.
It said Canada in parentheses, but then it is celebrated in the US, but it's something else. But I used White Ribbon Day because I like it.
Fair.
Okay, so I have Jackson Katz. He is internationally renowned for his pioneering scholarship and activism on issues of gender, race, and violence. He has long been a major figure and thought leader in the growing global movement of men working to promote gender equality and prevent gender violence. He's also the co-founder of Mentors in Violence Prevention. So for short, that's cute. Which is one of the longest running and most widely influential gender violence prevention programs in North America right now. So it also introduced the bystander approach to the sexual assault relationships abuse fields. Violence against women is, this is where I was watching his TED Talk, the Violence Against Women's TED Talk. His whole concept of the video was stating that it's a men's issue. So when we're addressing different topics such as gender violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, relationship abuse, and all those things, his concept is stating that it is a men's issue as well. When they speak on these topics, majority of the time as society, we think of it as a woman's issue. But it's just taking the focus on holding a certain group, potentially known in society to hold power. It's taking attention off of them. So the whole time in his TED Talk, he's just really addressing them and trying to rear back the attention on holding men accountable, making sure that when you are taking the attention off men, it's taking the attention off them to pay attention to these issues. And really just supporting women when issues like this arise. So I thought that was pretty neat about him. He used some example. It's like a sentence. And so the sentence starts off really simple. It says, John beats Mary. Okay. And then it continues with Mary was beaten by John. So John is still in the picture.
Yeah.
And then it switches to Mary was beaten. And then Mary was a battered woman, but that language has changed over time. And then the last sentence is Mary is a battered woman. So if you haven't noticed by now, within the sentence, John has left the sentence completely. And so this is just him showing how the diagram has changed and the attention off men taking the accountability and trying to rear back on men paying attention of like holding this person accountable for their actions and asking the right questions on. So why did John beat Mary instead of trying to remain the focus on the woman?
Like, what did she do?
Yeah, like what did she do? And asking questions of that nature, but instead rearing it back to the person doing the actions. And so that was his whole spiel in the TED Talk. I thought that was interesting. So
I like that sentence.
Yeah. I said, let me get this
example. It makes me think of, I think I mentioned it in our past episode about Drake and Kendrick talking about Kendrick addressing Drake's so-called hidden daughter. And he was talking about her having daddy issues. And I was kind of talking about how daddy issues, when it's talked about, it's almost like she has daddy issues. But like
it places the blame on the
the-
girl for
Yeah.
her trauma.
yes,
Or
Rather-
attachment issues due to.
rather than figuring out what the father did. The focus is on, dang, she's acting out, or whatever they want to say it is. The focus is on her reaction to trauma rather than who caused it.
So I think when other men are speaking on that and highlighting, it can bring men's attention to, oh yeah, I never thought of it like that. Or it's like, yeah, so this kind of, when you speak on language like that and you speak about like victim blaming and stuff like that, like I said before, it takes the attention off the person that really needs to be held accountable. And so when men speak on it, it's just in support of like, we also need to hold other people, other men and boys accountable for the actions that they portray.
Yeah, language is so important because I think people partake in victim blaming language without even realizing, because like talking about Mary is a battered woman, instead of figuring out how to reword that. But to somebody, it might seem like such a small change, like, oh, why does it matter? But you showing all those sentences or explaining all those sentences, like we can see the very, very obvious change. Is it my turn? So I'm not focusing on a man today. I'm focusing on a woman who's focusing on a man. So and I'm also focusing on a book which
It's a resource for men.
it's a resource for men, but also I would even say it's a resource for anyone with men in their life, aka everyone. But it's a book by Bell Hooks, called The Will to Change. I have some highlights on here from the description of the book. It says everyone needs to love and be loved, even men. Bell Hooks' Will to Change addresses maleness and masculinity in a new and challenging ways. Let's see, with trademark candor and fierce intelligence, Hooks answers the most common concerns of men, such as fear of intimacy and loss of their patriarchal place in society. She believes men can find a way to spiritual unity by getting back in touch with the emotionally open part of themselves. Men can access these feelings by giving themselves permission to be vulnerable. As they grow more comfortable and start believing that it's okay to feel, to need, to desire, they will thrive as equal partners in their intimate relationships. I read this book earlier this year, and the way I would describe it, is like her looking at the root cause. I was thinking about it this morning. When I read this book, I was challenging myself because it's so easy to be like, men. But if you really look at the root causes and the systems that men are born into, I'm like, men, but how could I blame them? Like in the systems that they live in and are born in. Before I get into the table of contents, I remember in part of the book, they talked about, maybe feminist women raising boys, and they can do their absolute best to make sure they're in touch with their feelings, they're okay with crying, they're okay with being vulnerable, but then they go to the outside world that doesn't encourage that. So really, when I say the systems that they're born into, because they can be born into a healthy home, but if the environment doesn't match that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to highlight the table of contents because it kind of it'll give a glimpse into everything that she covers. So the first one being Wanted, Men Who Love, and then Understanding the Patriarchy, Being a Boy, Stopping Male Violence, Male Sexual Being, Work, What's Love Got to Do with It, Feminist Manhood, Popular Culture, Media Masculinity, Healing Male Spirit, and then Reclaiming Male Integrity, and then Loving Men. So the last one is more towards people who love men. But yeah, it was such a good book. It definitely challenged me more of like, it's going back to the what's wrong with you rather than what happened to you. I think the Oprah book, kind of changing that question. Yeah, I just want to highlight that book.
Okay, so mine is also a person. His name is Tony Porter, and I thought of him actually because it was in our training packets. But he is an author, educator, and activist. But with this guy named Ted Bunch, I don't really know much about him, just that they founded this thing called A Call to Men, which is like an organization that tries to educate people about the socialization of men and like what healthy manhood and masculinity looks like and how that intersects with oppression, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so Tony Porter does a lot of this with like NFL, NBA, not WNBA, NHL. And so he like works with like a whole bunch of like sports people, which I thought was cool. But they work to mobilize men to be allies in sexual violence prevention. And since 2002, when they were founded, they've worked with over 1 million people. And like the main basis of this, he has this thing, it's called the man box, which is basically like everything when you think of like man up, don't cry, like women don't wear pink, any of that stuff, that's all in the man box. And so he's trying to like deconstruct that and show like healthier gender norms, and working with like anti-oppression stuff, and also like trying to deconstruct how boys and men are socialized to kind of like suppress their emotions because nothing good happens from that. But overall, he believes that the men have the power to change the oppression and stand with women by showing commonalities and the differences between the men who do bother women and then those who don't.
It's hard thinking about all these things. Just kind of, I had the thought a second ago over, I was like, man, I thought about specifically for men and boys, and then I just like, for everybody really, I was just with the systems and so many of the social norms that exist right now, I was like, man, everyone is just doomed to fail. Like, because I started thinking about specifically for men of just thinking about several of the things that like you had listed, Elsie, of it's just like with all of these expectations, like, and these expectations and these pressures, it's like, how can you help if this is like the culture that you're being in? It's just hard.
And something that I like about Bell Hooks, I don't know if it was The Will to Change or her other book, All About Love, but we as in anyone who loves men, either platonically or romantically, we can be there for them, help them guide the way, but it's their choice really. But something that she highlighted, again, I don't know which book it was, talking about so often like men look at their female partners as like, for lack of a better word, like a mommy, like fix me up. Like, again, don't know which book it was. She covers a lot of good things about really like romantic relationships. I lost my train of thought. But just not, I think it was The Will to Change, where sometimes men will think that the emotional component of being vulnerable and all these things will come from being in a relationship. Like they'll find it there, but it's almost like you need to go into a relationship with it already being found for it to work right. So if they go into a relationship and maybe they have some emotional conflict, they don't have the tools, they'll be like, well, love, they'll be like, man, forget love, like all these things. And it'll also happen to like maybe their female partner. I think it was a Will to Love, Will to Change, excuse me, where they'll be like, well, maybe I can help him, guide him, like that's part of love. But then it doesn't work because again, it goes back to the male in heterosexual relationships. That's what she talks about a lot. It'll go back to the male and but the female partner will take it as like, I'm wrong. I messed up. I failed them. I'm bad at love. So it's like it's an everyone problem. Like truly, it is an everyone problem. It impacts everyone. Going back to outside of romantic relationships, talking about like quote unquote daddy issues. Like it impacts us all.
We will never find success in like ending sexual violence and in like ending gender-based discrimination, like as long as men feel like they're like the enemy in this work as well. Like that's something that I think requires it requires a lot of nuance. Statistically, yes, the majority of XYZ like is caused or is perpetrated by men. However, like that just I feel like illustrates why it's even more important for men to be involved in this process and to feel like ownership in this kind of work as well. Yeah. Nice. Any other thoughts on? We love you, Ben.
That was gonna be my final thought, but I was like, maybe I'm being too playful.
We love you. We want you to be in this with us. Please be a part of us with this.
Oh yeah, I was gonna highlight that November 19th. I don't know if it's the same every year, but for 2024, November 19th was International Men's Day. That'll be my last thought.
Celebrate men. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and move us into our relationship goal. I'll be sharing that with us. Our relationship goal for you and for ourselves this week is to plan some intentional time with some or with one of the men or the boys in your life, just to connect with them, spend time with them, and just really take that intentional time to connect together. So that's our relationship goal, and then I believe Elsie has our recommendation for this week.
So my recommendation is to watch Tony Porter's TEDTalk. It's called A Call to Men, and it's only like 10 to 12 minutes long, so it's really not too difficult, but it's fun and really educational, and it was actually listed as one of the top 10 best TED Talks. I don't know which year. I just saw that on their website, but it was listed up there, so you should watch it.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's all from us for this week, but thank you so much for tuning in. It's been great to have you here with us. It will be another, I think, week. We're taking a break next week before our next episode. But in the meantime, if you're wanting some more prevention content, you can find us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention, or you can find us on Facebook or Instagram at Advocacy Waco. But we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye. Thanks so much for tuning in to Real-ationship Goals. This episode was produced by the Prevention and Education Department of the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. Interested in more content from PNE or the Advocacy Center? You can follow us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention or on Instagram and Facebook at Advocacy Waco. Be sure to like this episode and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Bye.